It began with a warm smile, a heartfelt sermon, and a vow to cleanse the town's spirit. Yet no one anticipated that this promise would involve demolishing the only church the town had ever known. Tucked away among gentle hills and vast cornfields in southern Louisiana, there lies a small community named St. Elora. It rarely appears on maps. There are no major roads leading there, just unpaved lanes, front porches, and neighbors who still greet each other every morning. Life in St. Elora unfolded at a slow pace. Some described it as peaceful, while others felt it was more difficult. But everyone agreed on one thing: the soul of the town was the old church on Main Street. St. Mary's Catholic Church had stood for over 100 years. Its red brick exterior had endured hurricanes, sorrow, new beginnings, and farewells. Every Sunday, its bells resonated across the farmland, summoning farmers, teachers, mechanics, and widows alike. It was more than a church. It represented memory and belonging. Even those who rarely attended Mass showed reverence when walking by. Some placed flowers on its steps each Mother's Day. Others lit candles inside for loved ones they never spoke of openly. In St. Elora, faith was quiet. It was passed down softly through the generations. Then came the election. Mike Anderson. That was the name featured on every yard sign, every radio commercial, every newspaper headline. A magnetic pastor turned political hopeful, Mike had recently arrived in town, established his own chapel, and rapidly captured the community's attention. Across much of the community, Mike Anderson captivated listeners with his fervent sermons and grand promises. He spoke passionately, with unwavering certainty and a sense of mission, until one tuned in carefully. "There is only one truth," he declared, "and it cannot be found in statues or buildings crafted by idol worshippers." Some applauded, some winced. Older residents, those baptized in the waters behind St. Mary's, married beneath its wooden cross, and who had buried their loved ones beneath its tall oak, remained silent. Not out of agreement, but because they had witnessed the consequences when faith turned into conflict. During his campaign, Mike seldom named Saint Mary's directly, yet many understood his stance clearly. He demanded spiritual reform and the purging of false customs. His message was one of renewal and unity, though tinged with division. Still, he prevailed, not just winning, but dominating the election. By the arrival of spring, Mike Anderson became the new mayor of St. Elora, and for a while, everything was calm. Too calm. No major reforms, no passionate speeches, just routine town council sessions, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and courteous smiles. Yet beneath the calm, a change had taken root. At Sunday services, whispers circulated. Attendance grew. Some attributed it to fear, others to devotion. Many believed it was a mix of both. Then suddenly something unusual occurred. The town's official website announced a new downtown revitalization initiative. It sounded harmless. Fresh benches, updated lighting, a complete makeover designed to breathe new life into the heart of St. Elora. The regional hub for spiritual renewal had changed. Yet tucked away within the architectural plans, hidden among all the gleaming glass and steel, St. Mary's vanished. No sign of relocation, no tribute, just wiped from existence. That moment marked the beginning of the real prayers. Want to discover the entire story of what happened next, how a community fought back against authority, and how a single extraordinary event altered everything? Keep watching, because the true turning point is still ahead. At first, most residents believed the mayor's silence was a gesture of respect. Mike Anderson had not uttered a single word about St. Mary since taking office. He opened the farmers' market with ribbon cutting, awarded scholarships at the high school, and even joined local veterans on Memorial Day. To an outsider, he seemed like any ordinary small-town leader. However, those who paid close attention could feel a deeper tension simmering beneath his calm exterior. The first signs appeared during a Thursday service at his church, New Light Chapel. Standing behind the pulpit in a sharp gray suit, his voice was clear and pointed. He preached, "The Lord said, 'You shall have no other gods before me.'" Then he added, "Yet some kneel before statues, light candles to figures molded from clay, and call this worship. That is not faith, but idolatry." He never named Saint Mary's outright, but did not need to. Everyone in St. Ella understood whom he was referring to. News spread quickly. The following day, the cafe on Main Street was filled with hushed conversations and knowing glances. Mrs. Redmond, who had not attended Mass in 5 years, was among those whispering. For years, people entered St. Mary's and lit candles. A farmer named Jack started attending Sunday services wearing his work boots still covered in mud. Gradually, the church benches began to fill again, not out of resistance, but out of something deeper, something long-standing and protective. They were not just defending a building, they were safeguarding memories, family ties, and traditions. However, Mike Anderson was far from finished. 2 weeks later, he unveiled the initial stage of a spiritual renewal project. The town council, mostly composed of his allies, listened attentively as he shared his presentation. He spoke of modern designs, open areas, multifunctional auditoriums, yet there was a notable absence. No mention of St. Mary's. He expressed ideas about leaving behind outdated symbols and embracing faith that dwells in the soul rather than in structures. Some audience members applauded, while others remained still, their eyes watchful and skeptical. Reverend Mike sought not only to update the town's look, but also to redefine what sacredness meant. Then the leaks appeared. An anonymous email began circulating throughout the town, passed along from inbox to inbox, discussed at family tables, and murmured about during PTA meetings. It exposed an internal memo about construction revealing that contracts for the new spiritual center had been signed months before the recent election even concluded. The firm contracted belonged to Mike's brother-in-law. A handful of courageous locals brought this story to the community newspaper. The headline boldly stated, "Faith in." Supporters claimed the mayor's church was essential to the town's revitalization. Mike Anderson responded with a carefully planned video. He described the accusations as unfounded attacks from people unable to move on from the past. He maintained the project aimed to bring the community together under a shared vision of spiritual development. However, the harm had been done. Folks no longer viewed him as a pastor, but as someone set on erasing an important part of their identity. The divide grew deeper. During Sunday services, Father Thomas kept his messages gentle, focusing on hope and strength in difficult times. Yet parishioners sensed a sorrow in his gaze. After one service, a young girl asked if Jesus would feel sad if someone destroyed his home. Father Thomas could not find words quickly enough. Meanwhile, some of Mike's followers became louder and more hostile. They called St. Mary's an outdated relic obstructing progress. Heated debates appeared on online platforms, yard signs were taken, and paint was thrown onto the church mailbox. Still, the church bells rang every Sunday, and candles kept their flames alive. In St. Laura, faith did not scream aloud. It quietly persevered. Within that resilience, an invisible but firm boundary had been drawn. The congregation of St. Mary's was no longer merely protecting a building, but bracing for a conflict they never wished for, against a mayor convinced he could reshape belief with concrete and steel. Yet certain things, certain sacred traditions, cannot be simply paved over. The change did not arrive as an official announcement. There was no community meeting, no press event, no formal vote. Instead, it showed up as a subtle notice on the town's official website. Merely a single sentence tucked inside a polished PDF named Downtown Revitalization Phase 2. The majority of residents would have overlooked it. Most would not even have bothered to download it. Yet someone did. That someone was Mike Anderson, a retired librarian with a keen eye and an even sharper memory. He had meticulously archived every municipal plan, map, and report the town had released over the past 30 years. He wasn't inquisitive, he was vigilant, and as he scanned that PDF during his morning coffee, his hand suddenly paused mid-sip. The map revealed the revamped downtown design, including new bike paths, a renovated farmers market, contemporary seating, an expansive spiritual renewal center with a glass-roofed auditorium, a meditation garden, and a technologically advanced chapel. But where St. Mary's Church had always stood was merely a gray block-marked cleared site. Mike did not react aloud at first. Instead, he printed the file, drove to the church, and handed it over to Father Thomas with hands that trembled slightly. The priest did not need to read much. The phrase cleared, sight spoke volumes. By sunset, the news had raced through the town faster than wildfire through dry grass. People began sharing the news by text messages. Printed notices appeared on the bulletin board outside the diner. Several fearless teenagers plastered handwritten signs all around the town square. They are demolishing St. Mary's. This is not revival. This is destruction. For the first time, the quiet was broken. Father Thomas addressed the congregation following Mass that Sunday. His voice, typically steady and composed, showed slight cracks at the edges. He said progress requires sacrifice, holding the blueprint up for all to see. But faith does not stand in the way. It serves as a base to grow upon. In the back, a woman sobbed quietly while an elderly man clenched his teeth and crossed himself. Behind closed doors, town officials attempted to put a positive spin on the situation. A representative argued the church was outdated structurally and that moving it had been talked about, although no one at St. Mary's had ever heard any mention of such plans. Then the pictures surfaced. A construction worker, who wished to stay unnamed, leaked photos showing equipment being transported to a warehouse just 2 blocks from the church. Bulldozers, jackhammers, and surveyor flags were already subtly placed around the church property. Their small orange ribbons fluttered in the breeze like warnings nobody wanted. That same week, city maintenance vehicles arrived near the church to inspect underground utilities. Yet longtime residents sensed something was wrong. No utility checks had ever happened without prior notice. No crews had ever come equipped with such costly machinery. Everything was unfolding quietly, deliberately, and purposefully. When local journalist Jonah Rees finally investigated the construction company hired for the task, the truth slithered out like a serpent hiding in tall grass. The main contractor was Brookstone Developments, a private company headquartered 2 counties away. The executive board included one Ethan Malloy, the brother-in-law of Mike Anderson. This was not merely about spiritual revival. It was not only about renewing the city. It was profit disguised in scripture and marketed as salvation. The town council, now completely controlled by Mike's influence, refused to respond. Petitions were disregarded. Emails returned with generic replies. The few officials who had once shown support for the church now avoided meeting gazes in public. Yet something unexpected began to emerge in St. Elora. Not anger, not protests, but conviction. People started coming to St. Mary's during weekdays, not solely on Sundays. They cleaned the pews, repainted the fence, and planted roses near the entrance. One young boy left his baseball glove on the altar, along with a note saying, "Please do not take my church." The building was never just wood and stone. It held memories and served as a refuge. Now it had become a defining boundary. The mayor might have drawn his plans in ink, but the citizens of St. Elora were getting ready to express their defiance through prayer. And prayers, unlike permits, require no permission. The demonstrations never involved loudspeakers or chants. There were no shattered windows or signs blocking roads, only silence, candles, and prayer. It began with one woman. Her name was Mrs. Evelyn Morales, aged 84, born and baptized at St. Mary's, famous around town for her peach cobbler and her rosaries always clasped in her hands. On a Thursday afternoon, as rumors spread, while surveyor trucks circled like wary vultures around the church, Mike Anderson arrived alone. He walked slowly over the gravel, placed a folding chair at the base of the front steps, and sat down clutching his rosary beads. Then he started praying in a soft yet audible voice. He did not seem like a protester, but soon he became one. By sunset, 4 more chairs appeared next to his. By midnight, blankets, coffee thermoses, and even a space heater borrowed from the fire station were brought along. Someone carried folding tables, others brought sandwiches, and every single participant contributed their faith. They called it the Night Watch. No signs, no chants, only the murmured Hail Marys resonating under the night sky. Word spread fast. Local journalists arrived with cameras but were met with polite nods and declined interviews. "We are not here to speak," a woman said. "We are here to hear the only voice that counts now." By Saturday, over 70 people had gathered at the vigil. Some stayed overnight while others arrived before dawn to replace those going home to rest. Whole families took shifts. A 12-year-old boy named Jack brought his guitar and gently played a aria as the sun rose. Across the street, a few men from the mayor's church observed silently from their pickup trucks, but said nothing. Even those who had not entered St. Mary's for years began to come quietly and humbly, just to kneel for a brief moment. Construction workers, mechanics, high school athletes wearing varsity jackets, and a single father with his child. All were drawn to this silent expression of hope and solidarity. A toddler slept gently on his shoulder. Something was growing, not louder but deeper in meaning. Inside the church, Father Thomas kept the doors open from dawn until midnight. The candles on the altar never ceased to glow. He did not deliver passionate speeches or organize protests. Instead, he moved quietly among his congregation, handing out blessings, tissues, and the occasional encouraging smile. On Sunday morning, the church bells rang more loudly than they had in ages. That day, the pews filled up well before the organ began to play. The building could not accommodate everyone. So many stood outside in the chilly air, listening through open windows. When Father Thomas lifted the Eucharist, a voice in the crowd murmured, "This is what we are standing for." Yet nobody was fighting with anger or violence. The resistance took shape through kneeling on cold pavement and pressing hands together in prayer. It shone through candles flickering inside glass jars and words drawn with chalk on the sidewalk saying, "Lord, guard this home. Do not let them destroy her." Small businesses quietly joined the cause. A bakery owner donated bagels every morning. A florist placed fresh lilies at the foot of the statue of the Virgin. A mechanic offered to fix cars without charge for those coming to pray. Some supporters of the mayor dismissed the vigil on social media, calling it nothing more than sentimental older Catholics. But deep inside, the community knew the truth. This was not about nostalgia. This was a memory unwilling to fade away. Each evening, the vigil did not grow louder but gained weight and significance. It became the town's steady pulse. By the end of the second week, a woman named Jasmine Rowe, who had lost her teenage daughter many years earlier and had not set foot inside a church since then, approached the steps clutching a candle. She softly spoke her daughter's name, knelt beside Mrs. Evelyn, and joined the silent prayers. No one instructed her on what to say, nor questioned her reason for coming. She simply belonged there. One night, a man from the mayor's office drove past and shook his head. "They will wear out," he murmured. But wear out they did not. Grief never tires. Hope does not fade. Faith is not measured by noise, but by calmness. Within that calmness, the people of St. Elora had decided that if anyone wanted to tear down the church, they would have to do so while walking through prayer. And that is no easy task with heaven watching. It was the vigil's third week. By now, St. Mary's Steps had become a second home to dozens of people. Sleeping bags were lined along the walls. Softly glowing lanterns flickered like gentle halos. Even the old oak tree near the front gate seemed taller, as though it too was guarding the devoted. That Wednesday night, the temperature had fallen below 40 degrees Celsius. Only a small group had stayed on the overnight watch. 7 in total. Wrapped in blankets and heavy coats, they quietly sipped tepid coffee and whispered prayers. Among them was James. Howard, a former Marine burdened by aching knees and clutching a worn rosary that once belonged to his grandmother, sat on a milk crate with his eyes shut and head lowered. Nearby, Sister Bernardet, a retired nun in her 70s, led them through the last decade of the rosary. "Holy Mary, Mother of God," she murmured softly, her voice barely audible above the chilly wind. The others followed her quietly, their chanting slow and steady like a heartbeat in the frigid air. And then it happened. At exactly 2:17 in the morning, every candle on the steps extinguished all at once. There was no wind, no breeze, just darkness. The sudden quietness sliced through the silence like a sharp blade. James glanced upward first. "Sister?" he asked. "I did not blow it out," she replied, clutching her coat closer. One woman pulled out a lighter and flicked it. Nothing. Another tried her phone's flashlight. It was dead. A third struck a match. It flared briefly, then died in her fingers. That was when they heard it. The sound of ancient hinges creaking slowly, deliberately. All heads turned toward the church doors. Now these doors had been chained and padlocked by the town council since the construction order was issued. No one had been allowed inside for over 2 weeks. But now, bathed in the faint glow of a lone street lamp, they saw it. The left door was inching open as if gently pushed from inside. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, driven by pure instinct or perhaps a divine call, Sister Bernardet sank to her knees. Her voice shattered the silence. "If it is you, Mother of Mercy, be present with us this evening. Guard this home." A breeze arose. Not chilling, not sharp, but gentle, like a soft breath against the skin. The atmosphere shifted, becoming heavier, thicker. It did not invoke fear. Instead, it felt like a presence, as though someone had quietly entered the room. A dog from a nearby yard started howling. Birds stirred among the branches of the tree above. Near the church entrance, just beyond the shadows, something shimmered, not a form, not a figure, only light, as if the moon itself had taken refuge inside the building. They stayed outside until the first light. No one dared cross the threshold, No one dared shut the door. When the sun appeared and Father Thomas came for morning prayers, the 7 vigil watchers remained there, eyes wide open, hearts racing, hands tightly clasped. The priest ascended the stone steps, observed the open door, and hesitated. "Who unlocked this?" he inquired. Silence met his question. What occurred afterwards was even more perplexing. Inside the church, at the base of the altar, the floor was covered in fresh crimson roses, full blooms, not just petals, arranged meticulously, almost perfectly in neat rows. There had been no flowers there the previous night. The church was secured, nobody had keys, no florist had approached the premises for several days. Father Thomas was speechless. He bent down, picked a single flower, and brought it to his nose. It was still damp with dew, fragrant and warm, as if it had been gathered moments before. He glanced up toward the altar where the statue of the Virgin Mary was positioned, her eyes lowered in serene compassion. A slender ray of sunlight passed through the shattered stained glass window and landed precisely on her face. Silence filled the room. By midday, the news had reached everyone. They claimed the church had opened its doors on its own. Roses appeared as if for a wedding celebration. An unexpected light emerged from nowhere. Quiet voices exchanged stories from porch to porch, shop to shop. Some dismissed the event as a hoax. Others sought rational explanations. Yet for the 7 people who remained until nightfall, there was no uncertainty. Something had entered that sacred space. Something invisible yet palpable, conveying the message, "This place is not yours to ruin." That evening, over 200 individuals arrived for the vigil, each carrying a rose. For 2 days following the Night of the Roses, the church doors stayed open. Nobody dared to shut them. The town's atmosphere shifted, not louder or busier, but heavier, as if the air itself held its breath. Passers-by moved past St. Mary's with unhurried steps. Children no longer ran freely along the sidewalks as before. Even the mayor's office refrained from issuing any updates. Then, on the 3rd night, he appeared. No convoy, no media, no assistance, just a black car arriving slowly under a single streetlight before the church. Mayor Mike Anderson stepped out wearing a dark coat without a tie or umbrella despite the threatening clouds. He surveyed the scene, not the crowd because there was none, only a sparse few standing nearby. Parishioners stood across the street watching silently from a distance. They noticed him, but nobody called out. Nobody made a move. He crossed the street alone. One of the women observing whispered, "He has finally come to witness it with his own eyes." Yet not everyone believed his visit was for prayer. Inside the church, the space was almost deserted. Only a single person sat quietly near the side altar. Angela Rowe, the church's devoted caretaker for many years, had been tidying the pews when she heard the door creak open again. But this time, it was not a miracle. It was a man. She quietly slipped into the side chapel and peered from the shadows. The mayor did not speak or look around. He simply walked forward slowly and deliberately, stopping at the base of the main altar, his eyes fixed on the statue of the Virgin Mary. For a long moment he remained silent. Angela could see his jaw clench and his fist tighten. Then suddenly he broke the stillness. "Why?" he asked with a voice low but sharp. "Why do they worship you so deeply? You are only a carving, a legend created by Rome. And yet, they kneel, they weep, they offer everything to you." He stepped closer as if challenging the statue to respond. "If there is a God behind that stone face, then reveal yourself. Because I am exhausted from pretending. Exhausted from erecting churches I do not believe in. Exhausted from uttering words I do not feel." Suddenly he slammed his hand on the altar's base. The sound rang out like a gunshot in the still chapel. And then it happened. A gentle breeze swept through the sanctuary, even though all the windows were firmly closed. The night outside lay calm and motionless. Angela, hiding behind the pillar, sensed it as well. A warmth unlike any heater or lamp, more like a presence gently brushing past her cheek. Before either of them could respond, the statue of the Virgin Mary began to emit a glow. The light was not harsh or dramatic, but radiated softly from within. It pulsed tenderly over her eyes, her face, and her hands. Mike Anderson stumbled backward, instinctively raising a hand to shield his eyes. His mouth opened, yet no sound escaped. Angela saw it unmistakably. The Virgin's eyes were no longer closed, slightly open just enough to make the truth undeniable, enough to cause a grown man to shiver. Mike fell to his knees. At first there were no tears, only heavy, uneven breathing. He pressed his face into his hands and remained still for several minutes. Then, gradually, he rose just enough to crawl forward and placed his hand on the statue's feet. A quiet voice, clearly feminine, whispered through the space, "Do not touch what is sacred. This house is not yours to command." Angela did not hear it with her ears, but felt it deep in her heart, in her soul. Mike froze, and from his reaction she knew he felt it too. He said nothing more. Without looking around, he stood, wiped his face, and left the church the same way he had entered, alone. Angela waited until the door shut behind him. Then she collapsed onto the nearest pew, her heart racing, the rosary pressed so hard into her hands it left marks. The next day she kept silent, telling no one. Not immediately. She needed time to process what she had witnessed, what he had experienced. Yet she sensed it deep within her soul. He had arrived to challenge the sacred, but instead, it transformed him. Outside the church, the crowd remained unaware of what had unfolded inside. Not yet. But soon they would discover, because something fundamental had shifted. When he came out, eyes bloodshot, face drained of color, and hands empty, they understood the struggle was over, and that light had prevailed. For 3 days, Mike Anderson did not utter a single word. No press statements, no emails, no Sunday sermons from New Light Chapel, not even a post on his carefully managed social media accounts. The mayor seemed to vanish. Some speculated he left the city. Others believed he was ill. However, those present that evening, who saw him leaving St. Mary's with swollen eyes and trembling hands, knew the truth. He had not disappeared, but was grappling with something far greater than himself. Outside the church, the equipment remained still. Tractors covered with tarps and traffic cones gathered dust. The signs that once declared future site of the Spiritual Renewal Center were quietly removed by city employees without any explanation. Although no official announcements were made, everyone sensed it. The project had come to a halt. Father Thomas remained silent, only offering a faint smile each morning, opening the doors as usual, and lighting the altar candles. Angela, the silent observer of that extraordinary night, kept her secret but was changed in ways no one could see. Her steps grew slower, her prayers more fervent, and her gaze increasingly vigilant. Then, on a misty Sunday morning, he came back. Not in a procession, not through a secret entrance. He walked up the main stairs of St. Mary's just like any other churchgoer. No suit, no security, no speech. He wore a simple coat, carried nothing but a well-worn leather Bible, and in his right hand, a rosary. People noticed, naturally. Some stared in shock. Others averted their eyes, unsure of their emotions. But Father Thomas gave a gentle nod and moved aside as Mike Anderson entered the sacred space. Mike sat alone in the back pew, silent, head bowed. He did not request to speak or demand attention. He simply listened. When the service concluded, he did not hurry away. He waited until the congregation had left, then carefully approached the statue of the Virgin Mary. A handful remained behind at a distance to observe. Everyone stayed silent. He placed a single red rose at her feet. That was all. Yet it said so much. By that afternoon, murmurs began to circulate. He has changed. He saw something. He experienced it. And although Mike Anderson never revealed the full details of what took place that night inside the church, his actions conveyed the message clearly. He withdrew financial support for the restoration project. He convened an urgent council meeting and discreetly canceled the building permits. The contractor, who was his brother-in-law, was removed from the town's list of approved vendors. When journalists asked for his statement, Mike simply said, "Some places do not belong to us. Some places belong to God." During that week, people's perception of him shifted completely. The once fiery mayor, who had dismissed statues as mere idols and processions as nothing more than theatrical performances, now strode confidently past the church without hesitation. He greeted Sister Bernardet warmly and assisted Mr. Howard with his groceries. He even appeared at a parish bake sale, purchased a lemon pie, and lingered for the rosary prayer. There were no cameras or public fanfare, just sincere actions. The town did not erupt in applause or celebration. Instead, it softened deeply. He had been known as the Hammer. Now, He was a man ready to bow in humility. And within that humility, something sacred had begun to grow, not only inside him, but throughout the entire community. The boundaries that once divided pews from political factions, churches from councils, started to fade away. People who had not shared a word for months now gathered over coffee outside the chapel. Because the true miracle was not about the radiant statue or the blooming roses, it was about the man who came intending to demolish a church and left having restored it. That is the memory Saint Allah held onto, and that memory persisted long after the vigil candles had finally burned out. The morning of Sunday arrived feeling ordinary, at least from an outsider's view. Birds chirped softly atop rooftops covered only partially. Well-dressed children adjusted their collars nervously. The bells of St. Mary's tolled as they had for generations, steady, unwavering, and intact. Yet something intangible filled the atmosphere. Something unmistakably new. Rumors had quietly spread that morning with surprising speed. The mayor was set to speak, not through online platforms nor within his church, but right outside the very building he once sought to erase entirely. By 8:30 in the morning, the steps of St. Mary's had become crowded. Mothers cradled their infants tenderly. Veterans stood solemnly, their hands resting over their hearts. Even those who had not set foot inside a church for years showed up and waited patiently. No one wanted to miss this moment. Then he appeared. Without any security, podium, or microphone, just Mayor Mike Anderson strolling alone across Main Street with a small wooden cross pinned to his coat and a rosary hanging from his right wrist. His pace was slow, as though each step bore the weight of countless unspoken words. He paused at the foot of the steps, inhaled deeply, then lifted his gaze toward the gathering. His voice was soft but powerful in its simplicity. "I once came here to take something away. Today, I am here to give back." There was no clapping, only silence that felt sacred, reverent, and profound. I believed I understood faith. I thought I had the truth. Yet I never grasped what sacred truly meant until I knelt right here, begging for answers from a God I said I followed but never truly listened to. A gentle wind swept through the crowd. Some wept silently while others quietly nodded, their eyes fixed on the man who was once their adversary. "I have made mistakes," he confessed. "I let pride overpower my prayers. I allowed ambition to drown out humility. I did more than ignore your voices. I tried to silence them. I sought to erase your memories and replace them with my own idea of truth." His eyes rose toward the church behind him, glistening with emotion. Yet some things do not belong to politicians. Some things belong to a higher power. Then Mike Anderson reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He lifted it up and said, "This is the final decree to halt the St. Elora Renewal Project. Starting today, all building contracts are void. The land must stay as it is. And this church," his voice faltered, "this church will remain so long as you choose to preserve it." There was no loud cheer, just a quiet wave of relief, like a community finally exhaling after months of tension. Then something unexpected took place. Mike turned, climbed the steps, and placed the document on the church's doorstep. He knelt, kissed the stone edge, rose, and faced everyone once more. From his pocket, he pulled out a small cross pendant and held it high for all to see. "I do not know where my journey leads from here. I do not have all the answers, but I am certain of this." He paused, his voice thick with feeling. "This place belongs to God, not to me, nor to any mayor. And if you allow me, I want to dedicate the rest of my term to safeguarding what I once sought to dismantle." Still no applause, but then a voice began to sing softly and shakily, "Ave Maria." Soon another voice joined in, then 5, then 50. Before long, the entire town square was filled with hundreds singing together, tears streaming, hands lifted not in defiance but in harmony and peace. Mike Anderson remained motionless, his eyes shut, as if he was soaking in every single sound. In that instant, St. Allah transformed from merely a town with a preserved church into a place with a renewed spirit. Sometimes the true wonder happens when someone who once intended to destroy the sacred becomes its protector. The following weeks were calm, not silent like an empty street, but in the way Sundays feel holy and peaceful. Conversations softened, people lingered in doorways longer than usual, and smiles held an unseen kindness. St. Mary remained untouched and unharmed, appearing more vibrant than ever before. The townsfolk did not talk about the miracle often. Instead, they experienced it deeply. Nobody needed to explain the events of that night with the roses, the quiet radiance inside the church, or the mayor's shaking admission on the steps. The miracle was present in how people carried themselves, in the respectful atmosphere, and in the town's new steady rhythm. Father Thomas kept offering his masses as usual, but now his sermons radiated a softer warmth. He avoided topics of politics, revenge, or triumph. Instead, he spoke of change, hidden wonders, and how God rarely shouts but whispers softly enough for the soul to listen. One afternoon, a group of high school students created a mural on the brick wall behind the parish garden. It depicted the Virgin Mary with open arms standing before the church, and behind her were the words, "She did not stop the destruction. She prevented a heart from becoming cold." That phrase lingered with the community because, honestly, nothing supernatural had erupted in St. Elora. There were no lightning strikes, no divine voices echoing from above, no flames tearing through the sky. The miracle was not meant to dazzle or overwhelm. Its purpose was to soften, to enlighten quietly from the inside rather than to blind. Mike Anderson, once known as the fearless reformer and relentless challenger of tradition, had transformed into a calm figure in the town. He no longer sought the spotlight or public platforms. Instead, he attended food drives, raked leaves outside the library, and quietly took a seat in the back row of every Sunday service. Nobody asked him to speak, nor was it necessary. His silence conveyed far more than any of his former speeches ever did. This same man who once insisted that God did not reside in buildings now knelt before a statue without requesting anything, simply to feel close. Some felt the true miracle was the change within him. Others doubted the miracle itself, wondering how anyone could still believe. Yet the genuine wonder unfolded afterward. A town once split began to mend. The church benches filled, not with noise or mere duty, but with sincere yearning. Protestants and Catholics sat side by side during candlelit prayers. Volunteers from the mayor's old church, New Light Chapel, offered help to repair the stained glass at St. Mary's. Then one quiet Tuesday afternoon, Sister Bernadette discovered a gentle bouquet of red roses resting on the altar. There was no card, no signature, just a silent act of remembrance. This story continues to be shared among the townspeople. The story is shared not because it was spectacular, but because it was genuine. In a world hungry for drama, Sonora received something far more sustaining. A gradual miracle unfolding not through destruction, but through forgiveness. Ultimately, St. Mary's did more than just endure. It grew into a symbol greater than its physical walls. It represented what happens when people refuse to respond to hatred with more hatred, and instead kneel down, patiently waiting for heaven's intervention. The reality is that miracles do not appear to awe us. They come to transform us. The most profound miracles are not the ones that halt machines. They are those that soften hardened hearts and breathe life back into them. They rewrite endings that no one could have predicted. They leave a community not shouting in anger, but singing in joy. When St. Mary's bells toll nowadays, they do more than announce the beginning of Mass. They remind everyone that grace visited here once, unknown, unexpected, yet unforgettable. So if you ever question the strength of prayer or doubt whether silent faith can move unstoppable forces, remember this town, this church, and the man who sought to destroy it, but was ultimately rebuilt by the very God he wanted to silence. If this story moved you, please leave a like, share it with someone in need of hope, and subscribe to Touched by Grace for more inspiring tales of faith, redemption, and the quiet wonders still happening everywhere around us.